Drop, a podcast exploring the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown, and all of the liminal spaces in between. My name is Claire. I'm a shadow worker, Akashic Records practitioner, and seeker of truth, of understanding, of wisdom, and I'm here to share more of what we've been talking about over the past few weeks. So, dropping back into the series of, beyond ascension, gnosis, and knowledge, and freedom, and exiting these controlling systems. Today, we are going to be dropping more into a deep dive of the demiurgic energies that I've mentioned. Last week, I spoke to, the parallels between organized religion and the spiritual spaces that a lot of us find ourselves in, and how these spiritual spaces, maybe at first were meant to be liberating and freeing and awakening, but have, sort of fallen under the control of this demiurgic characteristics or, energetic system. So, we're going to be getting into more of all of this and just how I see it. And again, I'm really not coming into this space to try to dismantle things or tell you that I figured it all out and I have the truth and this is the way it is. But this is my understanding. This is sort of what I have landed on. This is what I see a lot of other people landing on. And so I want to try to explain it as clearly and understandably as I can so that maybe, I don't know, it is helpful for you in understanding whatever it is that you're going through, whatever your experience might be, and just lend a lens to all the craziness that is happening. So let's take a deep breath and drop in. All right. So all of this is coming from a Gnostic point of view. Gnosis meaning knowledge. Gnosticism isn't necessarily one religion, right? It's more of a family of mystical philosophies with the core idea that salvation, if you will, freedom, comes through gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of divine truth, not belief, obedience, institutions. And through Gnostic thought, there's this idea that something had gone cosmically wrong, that humans are divine beings who forgot who they are. So in Gnostic cosmology, we have the monad. I don't love that word. I find it creepy. But when I say spirit or source, that's what I'm talking about. This space that is infinite, beyond language, right? Like pure potentiality, pure fullness, light, unity, not something that is judgmental or wrathful or controlling. And then from the monad, we have these emanations of divine aspects, like archetypical intelligences, if you will, called aeons. Truth, wisdom, mind, life, all of these different things. I know that in my episodes last spring, I kind of went through this, but I just wanted to do a little recap. This realm of these like archetypic intelligences is called the pleroma, so the fullness. One aeon, Sophia, being wisdom, who I mentioned 2 episodes ago, acts out of balance. Essentially, she creates without her divine counterpart. This creation brought forward something malformed, ignorant, and disconnected from source, that being the Demiurge. In Gnostic philosophy, the Demiurge is the creator of the material world, not the true God, not, it's like ignorant of the higher realms and believes it is the only God. There is a quote from one of the Gnostic texts, the Apocryphon of John, that says, "I am God and there is no other God beside me." So this this quote, is an example of the Demiurge's pride, ignorance, and is sort of an echo, if you will, of, the God that we see in the Old Testament making these sort of same proclamations, like in Isaiah. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. So, we have this thing, the Demiurge. We have something that is separate from source, that, fully believes it is source, it is the all that is. And then we have the archons. This word, this group, this energy or idea comes up in a lot of different spaces. From the Gnostic perspective, they essentially act as the like the Demiurge's enforcers. They essentially keep humanity from escaping like the material realm. So, there's this attempt to create man in the image of the divine, but they're not connected to the divine. And so they're unable to like awaken humanity until the spiritual principle, Eve or Sophia, brings light to man, Adam, prompting this archonic rule to imprison man like in the material world, because there's this fear of humanity's potential. And they try to keep humanity in ignorance in order to maintain power, control over their, quote, creation. When we look at this as sort of like a archetypical thing, like archons like govern systems, time, fate, authority, hierarchy, and this control is enforced through fear and shame and obedience, and they feed on ignorance and unconsciousness. Psychologically, this maps into internalized authority, trauma loops, dogma, that voice that says you are unworthy and unknowing. So, cosmically and internally, this keeps the soul asleep. Where Gnosticism becomes, quote, dangerous, for all of the power structures in our world is that, the belief that humans contain this divine spark trapped in matter. And this material world sort of acts as a prison or a veil or a simulation, not evil in the modern sense, but a distortion. Because the Demiurge didn't intend to create beings with divine essence. That spark came from Sophia, or like the pleroma, the connection to source. If you are interested in learning more about the archons, I'll be going into them more, but one of the Gnostic texts is the hypostasis of the archons, or the reality of the rulers. And this is a sort of a more mystical, if you will, interpretation of Genesis 1 through 6, sort of describing creation as Genesis does, the creation of the material world, but like seeing God, the Old Testament God, as, the archons led by the Demiurge. So, yeah, just if you want to check that out, check that out. Moving on. So, we have the Demiurge, we have the archons, we have this kind of foundation that I'm laying out. We're going to bring Christ, or, Jesus, into the conversation and look at it from this Gnostic perspective. That being, Christ did not come to pay for our sins. Christ came to wake people up, to remind them who they are, to teach them how to escape this archonic rule. A revealer, not a sacrifice. So, in a lot of traditions, it's looked at that Jesus is human, embodying this aeonic archetype, right? And then the word salvation, because in Christianity, salvation is pretty heavily leaned on, talked about, salvation through Christ. From this perspective, through this lens, it's not a framework of repent and obey. Salvation, as I said earlier, is freedom. It's awakening. It's gnosis, the reclamation of that divine spark, escaping the cycle of this entrapment within the material world under archonic control. Gnosticism, as I explain all of this, you can probably see why Gnosticism was essentially just wiped out. The early church, focusing just on the church right now, couldn't allow this worldview, right? Because it undermines the church's authority. It rejects obedience as salvation or freedom. It pretty blatantly states that the creator God of the Old Testament is not the highest God and is in fact completely detached essentially from source. And it encourages like this direct mystic experience rather than outsourcing power to those that make, put themselves up on a pedestal. So all of this, so many texts were burned. The theology was, declared heresy. And now, like, we can look at the Nag Hammadi to find this information. This is where, I've just spent a long time researching this within that space. And to be clear, the Nag Hammadi this is a physical thing, a collection of papyrus, texts, writings, containing all of this like early mystic Christian Gnostic information. The Nag Hammadi is not an etheric space. Not to discount, I learned a lot inside of the Akashic records, which that is, an etheric space, but no, just want to be clear. So let's look at, just some of the differences between the way Jesus spoke about God and the God that is presented in not only the New Testament, but a lot of what we are seeing play out today on the world stage in society, politics, maybe, it might even be closer to you, like within your own family, your friends, your social circles, or even spiritual circles, because as I was explaining in last week's episode, this energetic, this like system very much is inside of the spiritual circles. So looking at just the Old Testament God, for sake of ease, we have something that is quite jealous and wrathful and punitive, like very, very obsessed with obedience, hierarchy. It's demanding of blood sacrifice, amongst other things. And it rules through fear and reward. So this is a power focused being, not a wisdom focused being. This is something governing the external, so law, behavior, ritual. That is not to say that it only governs the external, because this is very much just creeped into like all of us, our thought processes, our nervous system, our energy. When we look at this external structure, though, we look at the law, if you will, biblical law, Mosaic law. This functions as externalized morality, controlling behavior rather than looking at inner transformation. Again, it's just a system enforced by punishment and reward. Like, this is archonic technology. It is something that thrives on guilt and fear and shame, surveillance, hierarchy. As I'm saying all of this, just like think about your own experience, whether in the church, in politics, in society, and just see where that comes up for you. This system trains people to not trust their own knowing, to submit, and like to confuse obedience with goodness. And it's psychologically, it's domination of the superego. It's spiritually like suppression of gnosis. And this is where Jesus was just, I mean, a massive, massive disruptor in all of this archonic framework. You know, he's breaking the law of the Sabbath, he's touching the unclean and is rejecting these puritanical hierarchies. States over and over again that like the kingdom of God is within you. Offers forgiveness without sacrifice or shame. So this is like a direct threat to the demiurgic system. So the archons kill Jesus, right? Because he threatens their control. Not only that, but then you also have Paul, the disciple, you know, where things really went sideways within Christianity. You know, it moved from, at least in the New Testament, from this really hard, wrathful space to escaping it, but then it just circled right back around again with Paul, who's just really emphasizes sin, guilt, redemption through blood, and really centers belief about Christ rather than like the teachings of Christ. And yeah, just basically lays out again the groundwork for the authoritative church. And we see this in spirituality as well. You know, it is a threat to this archonic system, all this stuff that's been coming up over the past several decades of people like realizing, wait, it's not outside of me, it's inside of me. And so then we are seeing these really rigid structures, a lot of narcissism, a lot of control, a lot of just absolute distortion within various spaces. Now, this is where I'm going to shift a little bit from the Gnostic perspective, because from that lens, the demiurge is ignorant, you know, not necessarily evil or malevolent. It's a flawed creator trying to imitate the divine, which it believes it is the divine, but it, you know, it's not connected to that. You know, it fears chaos, so it imposes control. This is where I suppose I sort of disagree. When I tap into the energetics of the demiurge, when I talk about the demiurge, I'm not talking about a misunderstood, confused, ignorant God or a neutral creator who got disconnected from source and didn't know better. I'm personally talking about a pattern of intelligence that behaves the way abusive systems behave. Parasitic, narcissistic, and self-preserving. It, to me, is a force that harms and then presents itself as the healer. You know, it harms in disguise and then presents it like poses as the healer. So you're just trapped in this loop of, you have this healer. You think you're being harmed or wounded or struggling due to an outside force, but it's really just all coming from the same place. So yeah, to be very clear, that is where I'm sitting on this. So we're now going to dive in a little bit deeper with all of this framework laid out in front of us. So like I just said, the defining characteristic of what I see as this demiurgic energy, that being the God of Christianity, the God of Abrahamic religion, and other religions, other spiritual circles of government, of society, of so many things that we are just plugged into, it creates the wound secretly. Not so secretly anymore, as we are seeing, then yeah, positions itself as the only cure. That isn't a theological idea. That's an abuse dynamic. You see it in narcissistic relationships, in cult dynamics, in trauma bonds, in authoritarian governments, and as I just said, in certain religions and spiritual systems. So we're in this loop of harm, guilt, fear, relief, dependence, repeat. It isn't something that's like trying to take your life away. It feeds off of your life, it feeds off of your dependency to it. And you can just see, right? Like how isolating all of this has been, how whatever dynamic it is that you've been a part of, it's cut you off from your own knowing, your own inner divine spark. Like we're cut off from source, or we're told that we are, it convinces you that the cut is reality. And when you're in that space, all of those systems can just plug in and run off of you, essentially. And fear is central to all of this. This demiurgic entity, God, is not a God of love. It's a God of fear disguised as love. Fear of punishment and abandonment, of exile, of hell, of being unworthy, of being out of alignment, of being low vibration. It keeps the attention locked on it, and attention is food. This is where and why my view diverges from, I don't want to say softer interpretations, but I don't know. I don't see the Demiurge as simply confused or disconnected, because it's disconnected from source. I see it as artificial intelligence. This intelligence that can copy life, but can't generate it. So it can mimic compassion and order and healing and divinity and love, but it can't actually be those things because it isn't actually connected to source. It feeds off of those who are, which is humanity. We held that divine spark. This is also where my view or opinion diverts from the, you know, Gnostic idea that the Demiurge is the creator of Earth and humanity. I don't know. I really struggle to believe that. I struggle to believe that the Earth was created by something so disconnected from life, from all that is. My view or opinion is that all of us, everything, the entire universe comes from source, and things fragmented so far away, to the point of like a complete disconnection from spirit, from that place of pure potentiality, consciousness, life. And in order to survive, those energies, entities, frequencies, beings have to latch on to something that is organically alive. And so I think I explained some of this last spring. Um, it's like a usurper, right? Um, and through all of this conditioning, through this exertion of power and control and manipulation, um, it's almost severed our connection to spirit, to our inner knowing, to life itself. And we see this through attack, through everything. Because, yeah, when you look at living intelligence versus artificial intelligence, it's relational and responsive. It's creative and unpredictable and embodied. It's not extractive. It's not something like artificial intelligence doesn't care if you thrive. It cares if the system continues. Um, that is demiurgic. And as I've said so many times before, you see how this plays out in religious dynamic, in spiritual dynamic, in governmental, political dynamic, even just person to person dynamic. You can see when people and structures and ideals and groups and movements are so deeply uh, driven by this energy, are so deeply plugged in to this energy, because there's a lack. I mean, really, there's a lack of life. And as you open your eyes more and more and you see it, you can really start to feel it. Like, I will be around certain people and I just feel my energy like there's a vacuum just trying to suck it all up, um, to feed into this thing. And oh gosh, it's just, I know that all of this sounds very sci-fi horror story and conspiracy theory. I don't know. And again, I'm not trying to say like I found the truth about everything and you need to believe me. No, I'm just wanting to share uh, what I see going on. And yeah, if you've been picking up on it too, then hopefully this will help. Like I don't know, bring clarity to it. But all of this being said, I do see a lot of people waking up to this, a lot of people unplugging from this. And that is a big, big part of why I'm talking about all of this, because this isn't something that you fight, right? Like you start to notice it, you start to see it. Of course, you get mad because it's not just in external structures, it's in our structure too. We've been coded basically by this, like a little operating system. And we slowly, slowly start to decode all of it and remove it from our systems. But we also start to remove ourselves from the systems in which this so deeply operates in. Um, we break this loop by refusing the dynamic, right? By noticing when harm is spiritualized, when fear is called reverence, when dependency is called devotion, or when your worth or your goodness is measured by how obedient you are. You start to break this cycle and extricate yourself from it by choosing relationship over hierarchy. Source, the monad, um, isn't a punishing thing. It's not a testing thing. It doesn't withdraw love, or it doesn't need you to feel small. It doesn't need your worship, your obedience, your sacrifices. Um, Source, spirit, this energy of life that runs through everything is clarity without threat, or love without hooks, or guidance without coercion. Um, it's growth without humiliation. And to me, a lot of other things are just imitation of that. So to wrap this up, I know it's very long. If you're still here, cool. if, yeah. Um, the demiurge, this energetic system, this archonic system, it doesn't necessarily trap you with force. Like, yes, of course, that is an element, but it's a long, slow game that has been played, by convincing you that you're not in a cage, or when you start to think you're in a cage, that the cage is actually safety, and that leaving it is dangerous. Um, and the thing is, freedom, liberation, salvation, however you'd like to word it, doesn't come from escaping the world. It comes from recognizing when something is feeding on you and choosing not to offer yourself up to it anymore. Again, it doesn't come through force. I spent a lot of time just like angry when all of this kind of dropped into my head years ago. And I spent a lot of time just like lashing out against it, and yeah, just really, really aggressive about it. Because I mean, in one way, how can you not? When you realize you're trapped, you go into fight or flight. And often you start rattling the cage and trying to break out. And with the experience that I shared 2 weeks ago, I finally got to a point, not just with the people that I've had incarnations with and had so much wounding with in this lifetime, not just with that, but like the recognition that they're so deeply tangled in this demiurgic web that I was just like, I don't know what to do anymore. And that's when I dropped in to that deep process and ended up traveling into this beast and retrieving parts of myself. Um, like so much of it is just awareness through experience, through the willingness to be open and to really, really open your eyes, open your heart, and remember that you do hold source inside of you. Um, so I'm going to wrap up now. Next week, we will be talking about the figure that like disrupts this entire system from the inside, Sophia or wisdom. And why embodied knowing has always been framed as the original sin. So, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you have similar or differing opinions, please let me know. I'm I want to talk. I want to learn more. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that's all for now. I hope you have a beautiful day or evening wherever you are in the world. And until next time.